Hi everyone, here's the quiz video for today's lecture. First question, write a method that combines two arrays by alternating elements of each array. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this exact example. I'm going to create two arrays of integers. This one's going to be the 888 one. And that's going to be by 1231. Now I also need another array because I'm creating a new array here where I can store these values. We'll call it obviously an array of integers, and we'll call it array total. And the length of this array total is actually going to be the length of the array 1 plus the length of the array 2, so therefore 6. Here we go. Now I'm going to work with a for loop. So pretty much what I'm saying is that this integer I that I've created in my for loop is actually going to keep track of what position I am reading within my arrays 1 or 2. But I also need another integer to keep track of what position I'm storing them in within my total array. So I'm going to create another integer here called position. I'm going to initiate it to 0. And pretty much what's happening is that for each position of my array, total, I want to store the value of my array 1 to start with at the position 0, and then I want to store the value of my array 2 at the same position, which is 0. But in between both, I want to increment my position of my total array by 1. Now if I were to run it like this and print a statement here of my total array position, it would just print the last number of my last position of array 2. So that's not what I want. What I want is to print as I go. And I'm going to do so on the same lines and no one even realizes it. So I'm printing my array total at each position, since each position is now stored with the value from either my array 1 or my array 2. So that should be about it. Let's test it out. I have a problem here. That's an O and not a 0. That's my problem. Sorry guys. Okay. I'll just, sorry, for the time being. Obviously, I forgot to do that. Sorry, that's just a third question. So now that we've are able to compile, we can run this. And indeed, you see that we get the 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, just like on the question. However, you just have to be really careful. The way I did this question assumes that both array 1 and array 2 are of equal length. But it could be that array 1 is bigger or smaller than array 2 in length. So if that's the case, you would have to make an if statement prior to this for loop right there. You would have to make an if statement that checks which array is bigger. So if array 1 is bigger than array 2. And if that's the case, then your I here is going to be smaller than the smallest length. Okay, so either array 1 or array 2, whichever one is smaller. And you're going to do this whole thing, but then at the end of it, you're going to continue by just copying the values of the extended array, so of the longer array. So say this one was 8, 8, 8, and there was like a couple of other 8s. So here it would just copy the rest of the 8s. But here we did it assuming that they're all of equal length, and we'll keep it like that for now. Question 2 says, write a method that takes a number int as input and returns an array of its digits. So pretty much if I input a value 1, 2, 3, it's going to return an array of 1, 2, 3. So in order to input a value, we're going to use a scanner, the object, and we are going to create a new scanner called number input. And we're going to ask the user to input a number. And then with that number inputted, I'm going to store it into a type called long, and I'll explain why in just a second. So I'm going to call this one number entered, and this is just going to be my number inputted. That's going to be stored as a long. Pretty much what a long is the same as an integer, but integer has a max value and long has a higher max value than integer. So I discovered this because I entered some random numbers using my keyboard and I got an error. But if I entered smaller numbers into my keyboard, it wouldn't give me that error. So I found that it was actually the int that was causing the problem. So I just extended the int by using long. Now, if long causes a problem because its max value is somewhere around the 2 to the 63, if that causes a problem, well then you can always use another type called bigger integer, but we're not going to go there for now. We'll stay to long. Now what I want to do is actually I'm going to convert this number entered, which is now an integer. I'm going to convert this integer into a string called num. So we already saw this in one of the lectures earlier last week. And I'm also going to create an array of characters. And this array of characters, we'll call it array, is actually going to take this num and I'm going to insert this num, which is just a string at this point, into my character of arrays. My array of characters, sorry. But I'm going to insert it as characters and not as a whole string. Yeah. Now we're going to print this array position by position. So we're going to use a for loop for that. And we're just going to, as I said, print the array at every position. And that should work. So if I compile, missing the T. If I compile and I run, so I'm going to input some random number. And there you go. Here's your integer of the string 29340273609. Now for the third question, it says what is the largest prime that's smaller than 100 that can be described as a sum of primes? So if the largest prime is smaller than 100, the values used to find that largest prime must be prime themselves and less than 100 themselves. So pretty much this question is saying that you have a value a which is prime and smaller than 100, and it was formulated using a b plus a c, which are themselves both primes. So a prime plus a prime is equal to another prime which is smaller than 100. That's what this question is asking us to find. So as you saw, I need 3 integers. But I also need to check that each of these integers are prime. So we learned in class today how to check if a value is prime. So pretty much we are going to create a boolean. We created a method here of boolean. So I'm going to return a boolean at the end of this method. But I'm going to create a boolean called isPrime. And this method is going to evaluate whether the integer prime sent from my previous method, if that integer is indeed prime or not. So I'm going to initiate my boolean isPrime to true. And we're going to go right ahead into our for loop. So I'm initiating I as 2 because since we don't consider 1 to be a prime number in this question, the next smallest prime number after 1 is 2. So we'll just start it at 2. So pretty much what I want to do is take my prime number that was sent from this method up here that we're going to take care of in a minute. So I want to take this prime number and I want to check if it has any remainders when I divide it by any value that is not itself. So that is smaller than itself. And if that's the case, if it doesn't have any remainders, meaning this prime number, prime integer, is not prime. Therefore, I am going to change my boolean to false. And at the end of this method, I need to return something. And what it is I'm returning is the value of my boolean. So either true or false. If this condition is never met, well then I will return a true. And if this condition is met, well then I'm returning a false, meaning that the number sent here to evaluate if it was prime was in fact not prime. Back to the statement. So as I said, we needed a equals to b plus c. So in our prime method, we found a way to evaluate whether BCA of my first method is prime or not. Now, we need to go ahead and initiate values for integers a, b, and c. And I'm going to initiate the a value, and I'm also going to initiate another integer called the max prime number. So I will initiate that one to 0 for now. But for my b and my c integer, I'm going to initiate them within my for loop. So here is my b. And as I said, 2 is the smallest prime number, greater than 1. So we're going to start it at 2. And the question says that the sum of b and c has to be a prime and less than 100. Well, therefore, b and c themselves have to be less than 100 and prime. That's why I put less than 100. And within this for loop, I'm also going to initiate my integer c with the same conditions. And now now that I have integers b and integer c, I need to check if these two integers are prime. So I'm going to do that if both b and c is prime. Well then, let's go through something here. So this pretty much what I did is that I took my value from my sorry, integer b. I took my value from integer b and I'm sending it to my prime method that I created down here. And I'm taking my value from my integer c and I'm sending it to my prime method down here. And if both my prime method for b and c returns the Boolean true, so if both b and c are indeed prime, then I'm going to add them and store it in my variable a. So just as we said, b and c is prime, therefore I'm going to store it in my variable a. Now a, however, has to itself be prime and under 100. So let's check if this is the case. So my and makes sure that both of my statements are met. So here pretty much, now that I've evaluated that c is prime and b is prime and that each one are under 100, I have added them and stored them into my integer a. And now my integer a itself, as the question says, has to be smaller than 100 and prime. So that's the two conditions I'm checking, and the same way I checked for whether integer b and c was prime, I'm checking whether integer a is prime by sending it to my prime method down here, and only if it returns a true statement, so that this integer is in fact prime, will this loop occur. And this loop is pretty much just going to store the value of my a into my max prime. Now I am just going to outprint a little statement here just to check what my values of a, b, and c were. This is just a method of making sure that my code is actually working the way I want it to work. Actually, what I'm going to do is there. So, at the end of all of this, so once this whole system has worked and that it's found the max prime value a can possibly be under 100, so after all these loops, I'm going to outprint the value of my max prime. So let's see if this works. And there we go. So pretty much what we did here, we can see that both B and C are prime, and that when I add them, they're stored into A, and this equation is only printed if the A is under 100 and is prime itself. But I have a little issue, as you can tell. It's printing the same equations twice before it's actually printing the max value that A can be. So to fix this problem, and I realized that this problem has occurred because B, my integer B can take on the value 2, or my integer C can take on the value 2. Although these are mathematically equivalent, for Java, because I'm dealing with integers and their specific value and not an equation as a whole, this equation is not the same as this equation, because this equation, the B is 2 and the C is 3, and in this equation the B is 3 and the C is 2. So I just have to insert a little if statement right about there. And I'm going to say in this if statement that if C is bigger than B, and we're going to copy all of this, and we need to indent, sorry. So pretty much if C is bigger than D, so if the 3, so the C is bigger than D, the B, the 2, well then it'll print the statement. And in this case, since the B3 is bigger than the C2, it won't print this statement. So it'll just avoid the duplication of my equations being printed. So if I retry that, indeed I get the same thing and my equations are not being printed twice. See, there we go. And here we go, my max value that the integer A can have for my equation A is equal to B plus C, with both B and C prime and A prime and under 100 is 73. Hope this helped.